It took me a long time to finish the newly released Final Fantasy VII Remake. In the end, I just couldn't bear the knowledge that the characters I'd grown so accustomed to would cease waiting for me once I crossed that final threshold. There's something indelible about the characters and the story of the original which carries forward into this year's long-awaited remake that, even as someone who never played the 1997 release, I felt in full force. It's something I can't quite put my finger on, in the way the game presents itself, in its tone and in its demeanour, that makes it feel special. Perhaps it's through the imposing musical score, masterful expansion of well-beloved characters, and its dexterous combat that Final Fantasy VII Remake stands unabashed as it redefines its source material rather than cowering behind it.
You gonna stand there and pretend you can't hear the planet crying out in pain? I know you can!
You really hear that?
Damn straight I do!
Get help.
It does this largely by taking what holds up from the original and filtering it through the lens of an entirely new game. Combat has been masterfully transformed into real time, and the story has been expanded to take more time to better tell the story of Avalanche. Any elements of the original narrative that may have been a burden have been tossed out, and so Square has managed to maintain a well-paced story despite one or two unfortunate segments which tend to drag. Though, despite feeling shoehorned in, those segments feel like more of a speed bump than a blockade, which is a testament to the gripping nature of the narrative the developers have curated. The stakes are high as Avalanche struggles against the powers of Midgar, but the writing still manages to closely follow its characters, creating empathy through gameplay and through the music, which builds off the original Nobuo Uematsu works in interesting ways. The new and improved soundtrack hits all the notes of what made the original so special, and manages to modernise it in ways that feel warmly familiar and thoroughly unique. Whether it's the countless variations of the iconic battle theme that plays during enemy encounters, or the ambient tunes that play as you explore Midgar and take in the story, each track elevates the moments they're utilised in tenfold. The character themes are particularly special, often elevating the environments they're used in, forcing you to stop and take in the magic. Each track gives the colourful cast their own unique flavour to complement their brimming personalities. Sometimes these personalities overflow, almost to the point of annoyance, where during opening hours characters like Barrett are so over-exaggerated they're almost caricatures of themselves. The writing's often absurd and jarring at first, and the performances overactive. The writing cares little for subtlety, as every detail is announced, but as you venture deeper into the bowels of Midgar, the speeches and bizarre dialogue grow on you and the best moments shine through. It helps that those over-animated characters' arcs make them vastly more likeable as the game goes on, with main characters like Cloud's progression feeling smooth enough to be unobtrusive. My own attitude towards the members of Avalanche, the resistance fighters who accompany Cloud and fuel the game's story, was mirrored by Cloud's own reluctance to form an attachment. Early on in the game, Cloud is a mercenary for hire, only taking a job if the price is right. This is one of the more well-written character attributes the game offers early on. If someone gets too close, he becomes reluctant, grunts, and turns away.
Quit acting like you know me.
This runs parallel to the intriguing battle he's fighting within his own head, where visions of Sephiroth run rampant and fuel the player's desire for explanation, which is what keeps the player pushing through the story. This drive to continue onwards, however, can clash with the game's implementation of side quests, should you feel it necessary to tackle them, which slow the game's steady pace to a sudden halt, and feel unnecessary in relation to the bigger picture. Unless you're a big fan of hunting down cats or slaying monsters for payment and nothing more, you might be best served to skip the optional content. Admittedly, the game's linear structure doesn't allow much room for branching side stories a la The Witcher 3, but that's no excuse for low-effort attempts to pump up the game's runtime. Not that it even needs the boost. Final Fantasy VII Remake is still a healthy 30-hour experience without the side content, and that's before the added replayability afforded by the minigame pastimes and surprisingly satisfying combat. Admittedly, throwing heavy swords around isn't normally my idea of fun, but its implementation here is such a case where each thrust of Cloud's iconic Buster Sword lends satisfaction equal to that of the music which accompanies it. Between abilities like Triple Slash for high-speed combat, and enemies that require patience and a few parried attacks to knock down, there's plenty to keep the gameplay from dragging. In addition to simply button mashing, Cloud has two modes of attack, Operator and Punisher, which allow for two different playstyles which meld beautifully into a dance of death. Operator mode allows for quick movement and basic attacks, while Punisher is built for standing your ground and unleashing devastating force. This makes combat an unadulterated rush, furthered by the constant requirement of quick menu navigation to activate special attacks and use items, which, once mastered, feels akin to executing S-tier combos in your fighting game of choice. That holds true for your entire party, but each of the 4 playable characters caters to different playstyles. Barrett's machine gun arm, for instance, allows for satisfying if slightly passive ranged attacks, while you could also jump in as Tifa and unleash a flurry of gratifying punches. Aerith is one character I found almost too powerful in combat, though not to a game-breaking extent, as her excessive amount of mana allowed me to keep my whole party healed. If I'm playing as Cloud and I neglect my health, proceeding to take a stumble, I could switch to Aerith and revive my fallen ally before healing him up and swapping back to unleash my currently equipped summon. These are additional combat aids which appear and disappear at certain times during tough fights, and bring with them a whirl of gorgeous particle effects. To boot, they also happen to be so powerful, Square deemed it necessary to relegate them to only occasional use, as they're hefty enough to bite off a sizable chunk of health from any boss I'm currently engaging. This makes for a tool which fills me with glee and fills the bosses with dread whenever its prompt appears. Thankfully though, most bosses on display here are formidable enough. The best boss battles a game like this can offer is one that asks the player to figure out a strategy or weakness and follow that pattern. In this regard, Remake is hit or miss. Some bosses are perfectly executed, leaving the player with a sense of accomplishment after figuring out the pattern. Others require a great deal less strategy, but are still aided by the game's combat systems to provide variety in battle. Where Square Enix has properly outdone itself is the sense of bombast the boss fights provide. Each one combines grandiose visuals with some of the best tracks in an already inconceivable score to provide a stream of epic moments, perfectly contrasting with the slower paced moments interspersed throughout the game. These moments feel like a much needed breather after extended periods of slashing and shooting. Walking across the slum rooftops, taking in the majesty and impressive scale of Midgar, whilst getting to know your newly found friends is just one example of Final Fantasy VII Remake's most impressive moments. Even a scene in which Aerith and Cloud pick flowers in Aerith's garden. A scene which sounds simple enough, amplifies the relationship between those two characters in a way that feels truly special. Seeing them both meet for the first time and being present for their entire relationship helps establish an investment in their connection rarely seen in video games. That is where Remake shines the brightest, and where it's the most surprising. You might expect to be wowed by gargantuan bosses and top-of-the-range visuals, and you won't be disappointed. But Remake flies above all that to tell a story about its characters rather than its events. Despite a few hiccups in the early stages, Final Fantasy VII Remake eventually sinks into its groove and delivers some truly special moments. And each of those special moments is amplified by a bold score, which is just one more element that adapts its source material rather than remaking it. For those who haven't played the original, there will be some questions left unanswered, but what we end up with is still deeply satisfying in spite of that fact, and is sure to leave any fan, old or new, in restless anticipation for the next chapter.